The sun slid low over Sacramento as Eric drove home from work. His sedan hummed. Air blew cool on his face. He slowed at a yellow light that turned red. Blue and red lights flashed behind him. A siren cut through the calm. He pulled to the curb and rolled down his window. The officer walked up with firm steps and a hard stare. License and registration. Eric handed them over, steady and polite. A short talk turned sharp. Questions came with an edge that did not match the stop. Eric stayed calm, his voice even, his hands in view. Step out of the car. Eric stepped out. The pat-down was quick and rough, nothing. He was clean, the air grew tight. The officer let a phrase slip. People like you. Eric stood tall, met his eyes, and spoke in a measured tone. Officer, I think it's time you know who I am. Part 7, 750 words. No heading in the narration. Months later, the lights in the community hall warmed the faces of officers, city staff, and neighbors sitting side by side. Eric stood at the podium with a folder he barely needed. He did not start with blame. He started with a promise. He said the badge was not armor. It was a public trust, and trust needed proof, not speeches. He told them what had changed since the traffic stop. Not everything, not magic, but real steps. Training had shifted from quick slides to real practice. Officers worked through role-play scenes where small choices carried big weight. Supervisors reviewed stop reports with body cam clips each week, not each quarter. A clear timeline existed for complaints, and people who filed them now got updates instead of silence. Small things, he said, that felt big when you were the person pulled over on the side of the road. A shop owner in the second row raised a hand and shared a story about a late delivery. A stop, and a conversation that stayed respectful. It ended with a warning and a thank you, not an argument. The room did not cheer. It listened. That was the point. Listening was the start of safety. An older officer spoke next. He said he had been on the job long enough to see programs come and go. He said he did not love being told he was doing it wrong. But the new drills on tone and clear reasons had helped his young partner last week. The partner explained the stop cleanly, and the driver relaxed instead of tensing. The older officer said respect worked faster than pressure. He looked surprised as he said it, then a little proud. Eric nodded and kept the pace easy. He shared early numbers without turning the night into a chart. Fewer vague reasons written on stop reports, more specific notes tied to real violations, a small dip in complaints, a faster response time for the ones that came in. He said numbers were not lives, but they could point to better habits. He did not skip the hard part. He said one case had hurt morale because it put a name on a problem. The room knew which name. The officer from the roadside stop had faced a hearing, a suspension, and required coaching. He had also been assigned to foot patrol in a busy area with a mentor who was patient and direct. Eric said discipline mattered, but growth mattered too. The goal was to prevent the next bad stop, not just punish the last one. In the hallway after the meeting, that officer stood waiting. He looked smaller than his uniform, like the weight of it pressed in from every side. He told Eric he had finished the training. He said the first week on foot patrol had forced him to see people before he saw problems. He did not ask for a clean slate. He asked for a chance to be measured by what he did next. Eric listened. He said accountability and opportunity were not enemies. He said they would meet again in 90 days. That was the plan for everyone, not just him. Back in the hall, a youth leader spoke about fear on weekend nights and how a name badge and a gentle greeting changed the tone at a small park. A mother said her teenage son came home talking about a respectful stop for a broken tail light and how the officer showed him how to fix it. None of these stories erased pain, but they showed a direction. Eric returned to the mic and kept his words plain. He said trust moved at walking speed and broke at the speed of a shout. He reminded the room that policy only mattered if people felt it on the street, at a window, in a voice that stayed calm. He told officers that clarity and courtesy protected them too. Clear reasons cut through confusion. A steady tone lowered risk. Everyone went home safer when everyone felt seen. He described the next steps. Quarterly audits with random body cam pulls. A small team to spot patterns before they hardened. Community observers for training days. He invited residents to apply. He asked for more stories, even hard ones, so the department could learn while the lessons were still small. He paused and thanked the chief for standing behind the changes even when they drew heat. He thanked the officers who took the drills seriously. He thanked the people who showed up to speak, to listen, to hold the room steady when tempers wanted to rise. He said it was easier to turn away, but turning toward each other was the only way forward. When the event ended, people stayed. A few shook hands with officers they did not know. A young recruit asked the youth leader for advice about weekends at the park. An older resident asked for the complaint timeline and took a copy home. Eric stepped off the stage and helped stack chairs. He felt the quiet relief that comes when work is not done but is moving. Outside, the evening air was cool again, like the night of the stop but lighter somehow. Eric walked to his car and stood for a moment before getting in. He thought about the phrase that had cut him months ago and the line he gave back on the roadside. Respect, not a slogan, a daily act. He thought about the badge in his pocket and the many eyes it answered to. He drove home without a siren in the mirror. At a red light, he glanced at the families crossing, and the officer waving them through with an easy smile. Small things. He knew the next call could be hard. He knew not everyone in the city felt the change yet. But he also knew this. Accountability had found its legs and dignity had a place in the plan. If this story reached someone tonight, it would be because real people chose to do the slow work. One stop at a time, one voice at a time. And when the badge meant accountability to everyone, the street felt a little safer for everyone. The evening air hung heavy as Eric stood outside his car, the fading sunlight painting long shadows on the pavement. The officer's tone carried more weight than the stop deserved. His words pressed harder with each sentence as though he had already decided who Eric was. But Eric did not flinch. His calmness seemed out of place, almost unsettling to the man in uniform. The officer shifted, trying to regain control. His questions no longer felt like routine. They carried suspicion, coated with a hint of something unspoken. When he said, "People like you?" the silence that followed was sharper than the words themselves. Eric's eyes met his. The moment stretched long. "Officer," Eric said softly, but with a strength that filled the space between them. "I think it's time you know who I am." The officer smirked, masking a flicker of unease. "And who exactly is that?" Eric reached slowly into his pocket, his movements deliberate so there could be no mistake. He pulled out a small leather wallet and opened it with steady hands. The polished badge gleamed in the last light of the day. "My name is Eric Porter," he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." The words landed heavier than any shout. The officer's confident posture faltered. His eyes darted to the badge, then back to Eric's face, searching for a sign of mockery. But there was no humor there, only a steady gaze and quiet authority. The silence grew thick. The hum of passing cars in the distance felt louder than usual. The officer's hand slid away from his holster. He swallowed hard. For the first time, the weight of his own badge seemed to press down on him. Eric stepped closer, not threatening but unyielding. "Do you know what the most troubling part of this stop has been, officer?" The officer said nothing, his jaw tight. "It's not the pat-down," Eric continued. "It's not even the profiling. It's that you carried all of this out without once considering who I might be, or whether I knew my rights. You assumed I would not understand the law you are sworn to uphold." The words cut deeper than volume ever could. They carried disappointment, not rage. The officer's chest rose and fell faster now. His authority no longer felt certain. Eric let the silence linger before he spoke again. "Return my documents and think carefully about what happens next, because you will hear from me again. Not as a driver you pulled over, but as the man who decides if you deserve to wear that badge." The officer hesitated, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached into his chest pocket. He handed back the license and registration without a word. His eyes dropped to the ground, avoiding Eric's steady gaze. Eric took his documents, slid them back into his wallet, and walked toward his car. He paused at the door, turned slightly, and gave the officer one last look. "Remember this," Eric said. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." He got into his car, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving the officer frozen on the roadside, the sound of the cruiser's engine suddenly small against the weight of what had just happened. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of Eric's office. The city outside was already awake, but inside the air was quiet. His desk was stacked with reports, but one file sat open in front of him, pulling his full attention. The name at the top, Officer Bradley Larson. Eric leaned back in his chair and let the events of the night replay in his mind. The stop itself was over, but its meaning lingered. It wasn't just one officer acting out of line. It was a reflection of something deeper, habits, attitudes, and patterns that had been left unchecked for far too long. He flipped through Larson's record. On paper, it looked ordinary at first. Commendations for routine duty, steady years of service. But between the lines, there were threads of concern. Complaints marked resolved with no follow-up. Notes about unprofessional behavior that were quietly dismissed. Reports of excessive stops with vague justifications. Nothing explosive on its own, but together, they painted a picture of a man who felt untouchable. Eric closed the file and tapped his pen against the desk. He wasn't angry. Anger was quick and loud. What he felt was heavier, a determination that grew with each page he turned. This wasn't about punishing one man. This was about fixing the soil that let weeds grow in the first place. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. His assistant, Linda, stepped in carrying a stack of folders. "Morning, Mr. Porter. I've got the misconduct summaries from last month. Also, the chief asked me to remind you about the department review next week." Eric nodded and set Larson's file aside. "Thank you, Linda. Could you also schedule a meeting with Chief Daniels for this afternoon? There's something we need to discuss." Linda hesitated, her eyes flicking to the open file on his desk. She could sense the weight in his tone. "Of course," she said softly before slipping back out. Eric exhaled and let the room fall quiet again. He knew the easy path: log the incident, add it to Larson's record, and let it fade like the others. But easy paths rarely led to change. This time silence would not do. He opened a notebook and began to write. Not a report, but a plan. His pen moved quickly, sketching out steps. Department-wide review, training reforms, clearer accountability, transparent complaint tracking. He wasn't drafting punishment. He was designing prevention. The morning stretched on as he pieced together what this could look like. Each note tied back to the night before. He remembered the smug tone when Larson said, "Step out of the car," the way suspicion grew without cause. The moment the phrase, "people like you," hung in the air like smoke. These were not accidents. They were habits. Habits needed to be broken, replaced, and held accountable. By the time the clock ticked past noon, Eric had filled pages with ideas. His desk no longer felt weighed down by files. It felt like the foundation of something new. He closed his notebook, picked up Larson's file again, and studied the officer's photo clipped to the corner. "This isn't just about you," he murmured to himself. "It's about everyone who wears the badge." He placed the file neatly on top of the stack and straightened his tie. The meeting with Chief Daniels would not be easy. Pushing for change never was. But Eric had made up his mind. This was not going to be another incident lost in paperwork. This was the beginning of a fight for a culture that treated respect as more than a word. As he left his office, the building's halls felt different, heavier with purpose. Every step carried the memory of flashing lights on a quiet street and the truth that had stunned an officer into silence. Eric was ready to make sure that silence echoed beyond one man, into an entire department. The conference room was cool and quiet, its blinds drawn halfway against the afternoon sun. A pot of coffee sat untouched on the side table. Eric stood at the head of the long wooden table, his notes tucked neatly into a folder. He wasn't nervous, but he was ready. The weight of the meeting pressed on him like the silence before a storm. Chief Daniels entered with his usual steady stride. Years of service showed in his salt and pepper hair and the lines etched into his face. He carried himself like a man who had seen too much but refused to bend under it. He pulled out a chair, settled in, and leaned back with his hands clasped on his chest. "You wanted to see me, Eric," Daniels said. His tone was calm but curious. Eric nodded, sliding Larson's file across the table. "I did. I need to talk to you about a stop that happened last night." Daniels opened the file, flipping slowly through the pages. "Larson," he muttered, his brows tightening. "What happened this time?" Eric explained everything, not with drama, not with anger, but with precision. The flashing lights, the loaded questions, the phrase that cut deeper than the stop itself, "people like you." He told Daniels how he had revealed his badge, how the officer's face drained of confidence in a single heartbeat, how silence filled the space that words had failed to carry. Daniels listened without interruption. Only once did he rub his temples, a faint sigh escaping. When Eric finished, the room sat still for a long moment. This isn't the first time Larson's name has come across my desk, Daniels admitted at last. We've had complaints. Minor on paper. Always something we thought we could handle internally. And that's the problem, Eric replied firmly. Handled quietly means handled poorly. What happened last night wasn't unique. It's a symptom of something larger. If we ignore it, it spreads. Daniels leaned forward now, his elbows on the table. You're talking about more than discipline. I am, Eric said, his voice steady. I'm talking about change. Not a slap on the wrist. Not another note in a file. A department-wide review. Training that's real, not just a formality. Clear accountability for stops. Complaint tracking that actually closes the loop. We cannot keep doing this the same way. Daniels frowned. You know what you're asking for. It will ruffle feathers. A lot of them. Veterans will say you're questioning their experience. Young officers will feel like we don't trust them. The union will fight. And City Hall. Good. Eric cut in, his tone sharp but calm. If feathers are ruffled, that means the air is moving. That means something is shifting. Quiet has kept us where we are. Quiet has failed the people we serve. Daniel studied him for a long moment. His eyes were sharp, weighing the conviction in Eric's voice. Finally, he leaned back again, letting out a long breath. You've always been relentless, the chief said quietly. But you're right. If we don't hold ourselves to a higher standard, we can't expect trust from the community. Write it up. Draft your plan. I'll take it to the top. Eric nodded once, not with relief, but with resolve. This isn't about a plan on paper, Chief. This is about culture. And culture doesn't change unless leadership stands behind it. That means you. That means me. And it means every officer who thinks the badge makes them untouchable. Daniels gave a thin, tired smile. You never did like the easy fights. There are no easy fights worth having, Eric said simply. The chief stood, reaching for the file again. All right then. Let's make some noise. Eric gathered his notes, but he didn't move toward the door right away. He looked at Daniels, steady and unflinching. One more thing, he added. This isn't about Larson alone. If we treat him as the whole problem, we miss the point. He's a symptom. The disease is deeper. And if we don't cut it out, it will grow back. Daniels held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Understood. As Eric left the room, the air felt different. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was expectant. The first step had been taken. The easy part was over. The hard part was just beginning. The first sign of change was a short memo that did not sound like a memo. It was clear, human, and to the point. Every stop needs a clear reason. Say it at the window. Record it on the report. Turn on the camera before you speak. Close the loop with respect. Eric sent it to every supervisor before sunrise. By noon, watch commanders had it pinned on whiteboards across the city. Some officers nodded. Some frowned. Everyone read it. He built a small team in a spare room near internal affairs. An analyst who understood numbers. A trainer who understood people. A sergeant who knew the street on slow nights and busy ones. A community liaison who knew every church basement and rec center by first name. They pulled 3 months of stop reports and body cam clips. They did not hunt for villains. They looked for patterns. The patterns showed up fast. A handful of corners with too many stops and too little clarity. A late shift with more vague reasons than any other. A small group of officers who wrote the same weak phrase again and again. Suspicious behavior. Eric circled it with his pen and wrote one word next to it. How? He asked the trainer to draft a new drill. Start at the window. Speak the reason in plain language. Ask for documents without pressure in your voice. Explain next steps before you do them. If you change course, say why. Keep the camera on. Keep your tone steady. They called it the clear stop drill. Short, real, no slides. No speeches. Just practice until the steps felt natural. The first session was held in a dusty gym behind the academy. Large mats on the floor. A fake driver's door and a desk lamp for a spotlight. A few officers came in with arms crossed. They had seen programs come and go. The trainer did not lecture them. He ran the scene. Officer, why did you stop me? Because your left brake light is out. We are going to check your license and registration. Then I will show you the light so you can see it. Do you have any questions before we start? Simple words. No edge. It sounded calm. The room relaxed a little. Then the trainer made it hard. The driver in the drill was tired and worried. He spoke fast. He asked if this was about who he was. He asked if the officer was going to search him. The trainer paused the scene and turned to the group. Tell him the limits of what you are doing. Tell him what you are not doing. Say it clearly. Respect saves time. They ran the scene 5 more times with 5 different officers. Voices softened. Phrases sharpened. The words began to fit. Back at the office, the analyst built a small dashboard. Nothing fancy. 4 boxes on one screen. Percent of stops with the reason stated at first contact. Average time per stop. Body cam activation rate. Complaint response time. Each box turned green when the target was met for the week. The chief wanted numbers. Officers wanted proof the rules worked. The boxes did both. Resistance arrived on schedule. A union rep called the changes a blame game. A veteran said the city did not understand what it felt like at 2 in the morning on an empty street. Eric asked them to come to the next drill and pick the hardest scene they could imagine. They came, they made it hard. The trainer did not flinch. He reran the scene until both men said yes, the steps still worked when things were tense. The rep did not clap. He did nod. At a community forum in a school cafeteria, the chairs were set in a circle, not in rows. Ground rules were taped to the wall. Share, do not shout. Speak from your own life. No phones during stories. A bus driver talked about being late and feeling small at a window. A store owner talked about a clear warning that sent him home calm. A rookie officer listened with his hands folded and asked how his words sounded from the other side of the glass. The room softened. Nobody won. People were heard. Supervisors started doing short feedback walks. 10 minutes at the end of a shift. 1 stop reviewed. 1 praise, 1 fix. No long lectures. Just a steady drumbeat of better. Eric added a simple card to every patrol car. Front side, the clear stop steps in plain lines. Backside, phrases that lower heat. Here is why I stopped you. Here is what will happen next. Here is what I am not doing. Do you have any questions? No one called it a script. They called it the card. Officers kept it near the radio and used it when nights felt fast. Tech got a small upgrade too. The report form would not save if the reason field was blank. If the camera was off during the stop, the system asked why, not to punish. To prevent, Eric asked supervisors to highlight good work in a weekly note. Short 3 lines sent to every watch. This officer gave a clear reason at first contact. The driver calmed down. The stop took 5 minutes. Respect saved time. Nobody got defensive at praise. He also pushed for mentors, not the loudest voices, but the steadiest. People who could talk to strangers without raising their own blood pressure. They rode with officers who had high complaint numbers. Not to judge them. To share better habits in the car where habits are made. Late one night, Eric showed up at a hot corner that the data kept flagging. He brought coffee and stood under a streetlight with the sergeant on duty. They watched a stop unfold. Reason stated at the window. Hands visible, tone even. The driver left with a fix-it ticket and a nod. The sergeant looked at Eric. That used to take 15 minutes. It took 5. Rumors still moved through locker rooms. Some said the department wanted fewer stops to make numbers look good. Eric met with each watch and cleared it up. No quotas, no games. Stop when you must. Explain why. Write it clean. Treat people like they matter. That is the whole rule. By the 3rd week, the dashboard showed the first green streak. Body cam activation up. Complaint replies under 72 hours. Reasons stated at first contact in most stops on the late shift. The analyst printed the little green boxes and taped them above the coffee maker. It was not a parade. It was a start. There were hard moments too. 1 stop went sideways when an officer rushed his words and the driver felt cornered. Nobody got hurt, but trust cracked. The supervisor pulled the clip the same night and sat with the officer before the shift ended. They watched it once without talking. Then they watched again and paused on the first 30 seconds. Slow down here. Say the reason first. Ask for the document second. Breathe before you speak. The officer wrote the steps on the back of the card and kept it in his pocket. Eric set a 90-day plan on a single page. Days 1 to 30, drills, audits, forum listening, quick fixes to forms. Days 31 to 60, mentors in cars, random clip reviews, early wins shared. Days 61 to 90, policy edits published. New trainee curriculum, public report with plain language. No one had to guess what came next. The calendar went up in every station. On a Sunday afternoon, he met with faith leaders in a small office behind a sanctuary. They asked for a direct line when a stop felt wrong. He gave them a number that rang on a desk where a human sat, Not a recording. If you call, we call back, he said. They believed him because he said it like a promise he expected to keep. At the end of the month, Eric walked through the motor pool as the sun went down. Engines turned over. Doors thumped shut. He watched officers check cameras, test lights, and slide the card into the visor. He did not make a speech. He just said thank you and meant it. The work did not feel dramatic. It felt steady. It felt like laying rails in front of a moving train and checking the bolts twice. There were still hard corners and long nights. But more stops ended with clear words and less heat. More people drove away feeling seen, and more officers went home on time with their shoulders loose and their notes complete. Change had not arrived with sirens. It had arrived with small choices repeated. That was the gear that mattered. It was turning now, and it did not plan to stop. On the morning of the hearing, the conference room felt like a courtroom without the drama. A recorder sat on the table. Chairs lined the wall. The union rep took a seat near the end. A department attorney opened a folder. Officer Larson arrived early, uniform pressed, eyes tired. Eric came in with a notebook and a calm face that gave nothing away. The rules were clear. This was an administrative hearing, not a trial. The goal was truth, not a show. Eric set the tone in a few plain lines. This is about conduct. This is about standards. This is about the trust we ask the public to give us. They started with facts. A clerk read the incident summary. The body cam clip played on a screen with the volume low, but the words were heavy enough. The stop, the questions, the pat down. The phrase that cut the air, people like you. No one spoke during the clip. When it ended, the room stayed still for a few seconds that felt longer than they were. Eric asked measured questions. Why was the reason for the stop not stated at first contact? Why did the pat-down happen without a specific safety concern? When did the camera turn on? What policy supported each step? Larson answered in short bursts that trailed off. He spoke about instincts, about late shifts, about how the street feels. He could not point to a rule that matched his choices. The union rep made his case. The job is hard. Decisions are fast. No officer should fear discipline for doing his best under pressure. Eric did not argue the hardness of the job. He agreed with it. Then he returned to the anchor of the new standard. Hard is the reason for clarity, not the excuse to skip it. Two supervisors gave brief testimony. One spoke to patterns in reports that used vague language. The other explained how the new drills changed tone and reduced time on stops. A community liaison read two short statements gathered at a forum. One from a bus driver who felt small at a window. One from a store owner who left calm after a clear warning. No attacks, only lived facts. Before the room broke, Eric asked Larson if he had anything to add. The officer swallowed, looked at the table, then lifted his eyes. He said he had not meant harm. He said the words people like you came out faster than his sense. He said he wanted to do the work to fix what he had broken. The room did not soften. It did listen. The findings were issued that afternoon. Suspension without pay, mandatory coaching, and the full clear stop training block. 6 months of performance monitoring with random clip reviews. Reassignment to foot patrol with a mentor known for calm work under pressure. A formal note in the file. Not a career end, but a clear line. Eric did not announce a victory. He sent a short department note, the same tone as the memo that started this work. We hold the line on respect. We say the reason. We keep the camera on. We use our voice to lower heat. We correct fast when we miss. This is who we are choosing to be. Signals began to show up in small places first. On the late shift, a rookie started a stop at a dim corner. He spoke the reason up front, asked for documents, and said what would happen next. The driver's shoulders relaxed. The stop took 5 minutes, not 15. The supervisor's 10-minute feedback walk that night ended with one praise and one fix. Good tone. Next time, say the reason even sooner. At a busy intersection, a senior officer caught a brake light out and waved a driver into a safe spot. He explained the fix-it ticket, then walked to the back of the car and pressed the pedal while the driver looked. He showed the broken light like a neighbor would, not a judge. The driver left with a plan and a thank you. The dash door closed with less force than usual. Small, but it mattered. In roll call rooms, the clear stop card began to live in visors, not drawers. Officers traded phrases that worked. Here is what I am not doing is a line that turned heat into air. The report form's gentle. Guardrail, No saving without a stated reason. Stopped a few lazy habits at the keyboard. Nobody loved the extra step. Most admitted it kept them honest. There were stumbles, too. One stop ran hot when an officer stacked questions before giving the reason. The driver went defensive. Voices climbed. No one was hurt, but trust bent. The clip was pulled the same night. The supervisor and the officer watched it twice, pausing at the first 30 seconds. The fix was a rhythm, not a punishment. Reason first. Breath second. Questions third. The officer wrote the order on the back of the card in block letters and slid it into the visor where his eyes would meet it on the next call. In a room near internal affairs, the 4-box dashboard flickered to life each week. Activation rate up. Reason stated at first contact rising. Average stop time falling by small, honest amounts. Complaint response time under the new 72-hour target for the first full month. The analyst printed the green boxes and taped them by the coffee pot where no one could miss them, without missing caffeine. At a community forum in a library basement, chairs were set in a circle again. The ground rules were the same. Share, do not shout. A teenager spoke about a stop that made him shake in the past, then told a new story from last week. The officer had spoken softly. He had explained what he would do. The teen went home angry at the ticket but not at the badge. A small line but a different line. A teacher nodded and wrote it down for a parent meeting. Eric kept showing up where the work was not pretty. He stood under a freeway overpass with a sergeant at dusk and watched a stop where nerves were visible on both sides. The officer held to the steps. The driver's breathing slowed. The radio crackled and then quieted. The sergeant exhaled through his nose and said, "This would have gone sideways last month." He also went where trust was thin. A small group at a rec center asked hard questions about history and habit. Eric did not answer with spin. He answered with the plan and the calendar. He gave out a number that rang on a desk where someone picked up. "If you call, we call back," he said again. He said it like a promise because it was. One afternoon, Larson knocked on Eric's door. No uniform, just a plain shirt and a stiffness in his shoulders. He said the foot patrol had forced him to talk to people without a car door between them. He said the mentor did not let him hide behind silence. He did not ask for praise. He asked what the next 90 days would look like. Eric kept it simple. Do the drills. Keep the camera on. Use the card without acting like it is a script. Speak the reason first. If you stumble, fix it fast. We will watch the clips and talk again. You will be measured by what you do, not what you say. The signals kept stacking. A weekly note from supervisors highlighted quiet wins. A chief's message thanked an officer by name for clear work on a tough stop, and thanked a resident for filing a detailed compliment, the kind departments rarely receive. In the motor pool at shift change, doors closed a little softer. In reports, reasons grew specific. Suspicious behavior began to disappear from the page, replaced by real causes that could be checked and explained. Nothing about the city turned perfect. A hard night was still a hard night, but the shape of those nights began to change. The first 30 seconds of a stop, once the most fragile, became the strongest. Tone came in low and steady. Words carried weight without carrying threat. People drove away feeling seen. Officers went home with fewer knots in their necks. That was the signal Eric watched for most, the way small habits become normal. He did not ask for applause. He asked for repetition. He asked for standards that held when the weather was bad and the radio was busy. He asked for a culture where the badge meant the same sentence every time you wore it, accountable to everyone. The 90-day mark arrived with a thin stack of papers and a room that smelled like coffee and dust. Eric sat at his desk before sunrise and read every line of the draft report. He circled numbers with a pencil, not to celebrate them, but to test them. Body cam activation up. Reasons stated at first contact up. Stop times down by small honest minutes. Complaint response time under the new target for the entire month. He underlined a note from a supervisor about a stop that might have gone sideways but didn't, because the officer slowed down and used the card. He wrote one word in the margin: keep. By mid-morning, he walked the report down the hall to the chief. They stood at the window while the city moved below. Eric did not sell the numbers. He set them down like tools. These are early signals, he said. They do not fix history. They do tell us we are holding the line in the first 30 seconds. The chief nodded and asked the question that mattered. Can we hold it when the pressure spikes? Eric said yes, if leaders keep showing up when it is loud, not only when it is quiet. He spent the afternoon at the academy. The gym was warm and smelled of rubber mats. Recruits stood in a half circle while the trainer ran the clear stop drill with a volunteer who talked fast and worried out loud. The recruit's voice shook at first, then steadied. Reason first. Documents next. What will happen and what will not happen. The room loosened. Eric watched a face in the back row. A young woman with her hands behind her back, lips pressed in a straight line. She raised her hand and asked how to speak clearly when her own heart was pounding. The trainer said, "Borrow the steps until your breath catches up. Read the card if you must." Calm is a skill. It grows when you practice it. That night, Eric went to a hot corner with a sergeant and stood under a streetlight that buzzed. The air was cool and smelled faintly of oil from the nearby shops. A sedan rolled through a yellow that was more red than not. The patrol car eased in behind it and the lights clicked on. Eric stayed back and watched the officer approach. The voice at the window was steady. "Here is why I stopped you. Here is what I am going to do. Here is what I am not going to do." The driver's shoulders dropped. In 5 minutes, they were both gone. The sergeant looked tired and satisfied. "That used to take 15, he said again, like he was trying to convince himself the clock could change. The next day, Eric met Larson in a small room with 2 chairs and a glass of water on the table. No uniform today. Just a plain shirt and the awkwardness of a man who knew the ground rules. He had finished the suspension. He carried a notebook with creases at the corners. He said the foot patrol had made him look people in the eye before he said anything. He said the mentor had been blunt in a way that cut but did not humiliate. He said he had used the card more times than he wanted to admit. Eric asked him about a stop that had gone wrong. Larson did not dodge it. He described the moment his voice rose, the breath he forgot to take, the way the driver's hands fluttered because of his tone. He said he stopped, reset, and started over with the reason first. The stop ended without heat. He said the old him would have pushed harder. The new steps gave him something to stand on. Eric listened without softening the edges. He reminded Larson that the words on that roadside had not only been unprofessional, they had been a harm. He said the file would keep the suspension and the required coaching note. He said the next 90 days would include random clip reviews and a mentor check-in. He reassigned Larson to a community car with the same mentor for the first month. Then he added one more condition. You are going to help teach the drill twice a week, not to perform, to learn while you teach. Larson nodded once. It was not relief. It was acceptance. The public release of the report happened in a school auditorium that still had a banner for a spelling bee taped to the wall. No slides. Just a few printed copies on a table and chairs in a circle like the forums. The community liaison opened the door 15 minutes early. People came with folded arms and open notebooks. Eric spoke plainly. He named the traffic stop that started this without drama. He named the changes like a list you could check. He read the complaint response timeline out loud so everyone could hear it, then gave out a number that had a person on the other end. He said what was still weak. Late shift report clarity on 2 watches. Mentors stretched thin on busy weekends. He asked for help and paused long enough to mean it. A youth leader talked about Friday nights in the park and suggested a simple fix. Officers at the gate for 10 minutes at dusk. Not to police, but to greet and explain the plan for the night. A mechanic offered a brake light clinic once a month if the department would bring bulbs. A teacher asked if recruits could sit in on a parent night to answer questions about stops. The chief, who had slipped into a back chair without a uniform, said yes before anyone else could. The room softened. Not because anyone forgot the past, but because the future had a shape you could hold. On a warm Saturday, the first clinic set up in a church lot. Kids rode bikes in circles while a row of cars lined up for bulbs. Officers handed out the clear stop cards with the department patch covered by a sticker that said, "Plain words save time." A teenager who had spoken at a forum pointed to the card and read the lines to his friend, like he was practicing a script for a play. Larson worked the table with the mentor and said little. He carried boxes. He watched how the talk happened when there were no sirens. The second month ended with a small ceremony no one advertised. In a briefing room, the chief thanked a handful of officers by name for body cam clips that showed patient work on hard stops. He thanked a bus driver for a detailed compliment that named the time, place, and phrase that calmed him down. He thanked the analyst for a dashboard that told the truth without decoration. He thanked the trainer for keeping the drill gritty and short. He thanked the community liaison for circles that did not boil. He looked at Eric and did not give him a plaque. He just said keep going. Eric kept his own rituals small. He walked the motor pool at shift change. He asked rookies what line on the card they used most. He asked veterans which line they would borrow under pressure. He sat with supervisors after a tough clip and let the first minute play twice. He wrote thank you notes that named a phrase, not a number. He returned calls from people who did not trust departments as a rule and did not ask them to. There were still nights when the radio stacked and patience thinned. There were complaints that landed heavy. A stop where a voice snapped and had to be audited fast. A forum where an old harm cracked open, and the room held it without fixing it. Work did not turn clean. It turned consistent. The last scene came without warning on a weekday evening that looked like the first one. Eric drove home under a sky the color of copper. A light flashed yellow, then red. He slowed, breathing the same way he had taught others to breathe at a window. In the side mirror, he saw blue and red come alive behind a small van. The patrol car eased it to the curb. Eric did not rubberneck. He watched his own light. But in the next lane, as he rolled forward on green, he saw the officer lean at the window and speak. Even from a distance, he could read the body language. Hands open, shoulders down, a finger pointing to the back of the van where a brake light should glow and did not. The driver nodded. Both men looked at the same broken thing, not at each other like a threat. The stop took 5 minutes. The van pulled away. No doors slammed. Eric smiled without thinking and felt the weight of the badge in his pocket. Not as armor, as promise. He drove the last few blocks with the window cracked, the city air warm on his hand. He thought of the first night and the words that landed like a bruise. He thought of the hearing and the drill and the card and the quiet green boxes on a wall by a coffee pot. He thought of the teenager reading the lines out loud and the officer who chose to start over in the middle of a stop because the first 30 seconds had frayed. At home, he parked and sat for a moment before going inside. A child laughed on the sidewalk. Somewhere a siren rose and fell and then was gone. He did not tell himself the work was finished. He told himself the truth. The work was moving. It was moving in the right direction because people chose to carry it. One stop at a time, one voice at a time, one steady breath before the first word. He stepped out, locked the door, and looked back once at the car and the street that had written the first chapter of this change. The badge did not make anyone better. It made them accountable to everyone. And tonight, on a quiet block under an ordinary sky, that promise felt real.